Okay, we are going to be learning how to make clay stamps, and these are to identify your pottery. It is a potter's mark, and what you're going to need to start off with is a piece of computer paper and a pencil and hopefully a quarter or a nickel. A dime is too small, and anything larger than a quarter is much too big. So what you're going to do is you're going to start off by filling a piece of paper with circles. It is best to use a template rather than trying to freehand draw these, because if you freehand draw them, they turn out to be very inconsistent and not quite a circle. All right, so when you're finished filling up a piece of paper with these circles, you're going to start coming up with your design ideas. There's so many different ways to make your design. You can use letters, numbers, symbols, images, whatever is personal to you. Now remember, this is an identifying mark for you and your pottery, so you want to make it personal to you. So let's go over some of these designs, what works and what doesn't work. All right, if you look at this star right here, the circle that you draw is the border or the edge of the clay disc that you're going to make to carve your design into. This star touches the edge of the disc, so that is not going to work. You do not want your carving to go right up to the edge. Okay, so let's look at this one. We move the star in, but it is just a line work. You cannot carve lines. All right, this does not work. It works in that it's inside the disc now. That's great. So what does work? What am I talking about here? You want to take your line design or your line drawing and you want to fill it in so that you know what shapes are going to work and what shapes are not going to work. So this is one that's going to work because it does not touch the edges and it is filled in now. Now let's look at this one right here. So it's another way to do a star. You can make shapes out of that. Instead of just one shape, you can make several shapes. Fill them in and you can see what's going to be carved out and what will not be carved out. Let's get a closer look at that. Okay, so you can see those ideas there. Keep close in. Let's look at a few more. You do not want to use somebody else's logo. So what you can do is you can modify the logo in any way that fits for you to be personal. And you can see that again, it's not a line design right here. It is a shape that's filled in. So these 4 shapes will be carved out. Okay, it's just another modification of that same idea with the Nike logo. Again, not touching the edges, not just lines, but filled in shapes. Smiley face, I see these a lot. And well, you know, they're happy. So it's okay to do something like this, but I prefer you to do something more unique to you. But this is not going to work because you're just going to be carving out 3 small lines. And again, you cannot carve out lines. So you got to turn it into shapes. And you're going to be missing the circle. This is the circle for the disc, not for your stamp. So this only indicates the edge of the clay. You'll get more ideas of that when we start to carve. All right, so what you can do then is let's pull the circle inside and draw that and the smiley face. Well, it's an idea, but it's still not going to work because these are lines and not shapes. Turning them into shapes looks like this. Now these lines are nice and thick, and this is an actual shape, all of them. So that can be carved out, and this again is the edge of the disc. Okay, so hearts. Hearts are very popular, and that's fine. Again, they're not very personal, so you want to do something that's personal for you. But this is not going to work again because it is just a line. All right, ways that you can finish this or make it work. Draw 2 hearts and then fill in the lines in between, and then you know that this is what's going to be carved out. Leaves a lot of blank space, but that's okay, it still works. We can fill in the entire heart, so that would be carved out. Maybe a smaller heart up here, circle down here if you want. All right, that's going to work. You know it's going to be carved out. All right, here's another line design. This is a frog, and well, it's just lines. Lines, like I've been telling you, are not going to work. So let's turn that into shape. All right, so all those lines are nice and thick. We filled in the center, and all of this then that you see that's darkened will be carved out. It's a little close to the edge right here, so I have to be very careful. All right, what if I want to do letters? Frog. What's not going to work about this? It is lines. We can turn them into shapes. All right, so I turn them into shapes and fill them in. And as I was doing this, I'm like, I don't like that. I'm not like that. So guess what? I probably won't choose this for my design because I just don't like it. All right, so I'm going to play around with my initials, AI. Cannot do this because it's lines. Shapes, filled in. Yes, that can be carved out. Everything that you see inside this disc, this circle, is going to be clay that does not get carved if it's white. If it's dark, that's what is carved out. All right, let's look at another design. Wasn't crazy about that because it looks like a T, so that's not my initials. So I tried this, played around with it, kind of like it, don't. Tried this modification. I tried this modification. I tried this modification. I just kept going with this. Oh, I don't like that either. I came up with one that I like. So see the process of coming up with a design that you're going to like. This was a simple AI turned into an abstract shape that can be carved out. Okay, let's look at numbers. I mean, it's okay to do letters as long as you get them wide enough so that they can be carved. Okay, 2020. So we want to make sure that we identify what year we made our pottery. So maybe we want to make a stamp with 2020 on it. Well, you can't do this. It's just lines. Now we thicken those lines and made them into shapes. That works. This works. I would have to fill those in so that I know what is going to be carved out. Okay, so we can do some 2020 ideas. All right, you got that idea. Now what we're going to do is we are going to actually make our stamp. I'm going to choose this one right here because I really do want to make this stamp. Although I've got a ton, I need some more. We need a clay disc. So you're going to take your clay and you are going to make a disc out of that. The same size as that quarter or the nickel that you drew on your paper. So take a small piece of clay, I'd say like this right here. See how it fits in the palm of my hand. Roll it into a sapphire. Nice and round. And then we're going to flatten the top and we're going to flatten the bottom. And as I do this, I'm going to support the edges so I don't lose the roundness. I want walls on the edges that go kind of straight up and down. I can roll this if I need to. And it's a trick to get the top and the bottom nice and flat. So you just have to work with your clay until it is really flat and smooth. I can roll it on the table a bit. But then I look at this and I see that I've got this concave mark. You can see by the shadow right there. You don't want that. That's not going to work. Let's look at the other side. The other side's nice and flat. That's going to work. So I want to be able to use both sides of this disc for carving. So I'm going to have to flatten this end. I'm going to grab a tool that I made. It's kind of got a paddle on it so I can flatten that edge out. Okay, so now I have a beautiful flat end and it's round, and the thickness of this is about the thickness of my finger. It's a little bit narrow on this one, so about the thickness of your finger. You don't need to go like this wide or anything, just the thickness of a finger so that you can carve on this side and this side. All right, so what you do when you're done making, I want you to make 2 discs because it's going to take some trial and error to get these right. And if you get that right the first time, well, then you get to carve an extra one. And again, we get to make 2 carvings on each disc. All right, so I'm going to set this aside until what it gets to is what's called leather hard. Leather hard is a state of clay that the clay, I can no longer squeeze this and change the shape. But if I take my fingernail and I dig it in here, I can dig my fingernail in there. This is what's called leather hard. This is the perfect carving condition for clay. And I don't want to leave that nail in there, so I can slightly get rid of that. Yeah. All right, when the disc is leather hard, it might take, we don't know exactly how long it's going to take. It depends on the weather. So keep an eye on your clay. I just set this one out aside, maybe an hour, maybe 2 hours, but I will keep checking on it. When it is leather hard, I'm going to put it back in the plastic because I don't want it to dry out completely. So that one's getting ready. This is now leather hard. I'm going to look at this side. Sorry, I showed you the wrong side. I'm going to look at this side right here, and I am going to show you how to get your impression on there. Let me take off what's on there so that you don't see that part. All right, let's see how to get that impression on there. I've got my design right here. I've got my clay disc that's leather hard. I am going to place this design right over top of my clay disc. I'm going to hold it so it doesn't slide around, and I'm going to take a pencil. I'm going to put it down here. I'm going to take this pencil and I'm going to outline my design, and I'm going to dig in there until the paper pretty much rips. It's okay if the paper rips. Actually, mine's not ripping bad. So I can reuse this template if I need to. If I make a mistake on this, I can reuse this. All right, now I'm going to pull this away. Good, my paper is still good, so I can use it again if I need to. And I'm left with this on my disc. And now what I'm going to do is you're going to take whatever tool you have available. We can make our own tools out of dowel rods by carving them, sanding them. You can use a pencil. You can use, my favorite that I have found out is this paper clip. If you take a paper clip and you turn it into this kind of a shape, that way you get good stability holding it. You take this end, well, these ends right here, you can tape it together or tie it together with string. And this end right here, if you take a hammer and you find somewhere that's very strong surface, do not do this indoors, go outside, take a hammer and just flatten this end, and you can see how it gives you a nice scoop for removing clay. Let me show you how this works. It's a really nice tool. Very inexpensive. All right, so I can see my design, and what I need to do is remove all the clay in the inside of these shapes. So I'm going to slowly start to pull this clay away. And because it is leather hard, the clay falls away, which is really nice. If you try this when it's too soft, the clay will just stick and you will get very, very frustrated. So do not try this when it's too soft. So you're going to have to learn what leather hard is. Okay, so I'll just keep working on this until I dig out all of these shapes, and then I'm going to have to clean them up. And I've got something on the other side that's already been in the process, so I can show you what it looks like after you've been working. But you can see how we have to dig the clay down. Okay, this one is that frog design, and I've already carved it out. It is very intricate. I knocked a couple of pieces of the clay off here, but that's okay because I need to have really wide openings for clay to move in here. That'll make more sense here in a moment. Okay, and I can see some areas that might need a little bit more carving. And it's very important to look at the walls of this. These walls, this is a wall inside here. The walls need to be straight up and down. Do not let them angle in or leave them angled in. You have to carve that clay out straight up and down. That is very, very important. Okay, another important part is how deep you carve in these. If you look at a pencil tip, you can see how the graphite shows a couple of millimeters before it hits the wooden part of the pencil. This is the depth that you want to carve to right when the graphite hits the pencil. So let's test this. If I embed this pencil inside my design, you can see how the graphite is now hidden. That is the depth that you want to carve. All right, if I go back to the other side and I embed the pencil in here, you can still see the graphite. It's definitely not deep enough. All right, so work on these until you get your design carved out with straight walls and the depth of a pencil. Well, the pencil lead at the tip. Okay, so let's move on. When you get that done and you know it's going to work, or the carving is correct, set it aside, not in plastic, and let it dry. You can actually do this before having it fired, but I've got a piece right here that's already been carved and it's been fired the first time. But you can do this a couple of times before it's been fired, but not very many times. All right, so what we're going to do when you get your disc and it's dry, you've got your carving done. This is on both sides. How you make a stamp. This is not your stamp. This is the template for your stamp. You're going to end up taking your clay and making a handle. So about a palm-sized piece of clay. You're going to roll it out just enough to where I can get a grip on that. And you can design this however you want. You can be very, very intricate with designing it. I just don't make it fragile. Something that the hand can hold on to pretty good. And then these two ends, it's very important to get those ends nice and flat. So I just pound it down some. Now, the ends being flat, you want them the same diameter as your disc. So I can test this, and I can see that's not quite wide enough, so I'm going to have to pound it a little bit more. I'm going to push this. I like to have a dent in the center of my stamp that just gives me a grip when I'm actually using it. Test it for size. That side works. Good, both sides work. All right, now this stamp is ready, or this handle is ready for the stamp. So I'm going to put that aside right here. I am now going to take a piece of clay that when I roll it, I can almost cover my stamp, but not quite. So you just take a piece of clay and roll it, and you can see how that's going to fit on top of here. I can see a little bit of the stamp around it, but most of it gets covered. All right, this is pretty soft clay. If your clay is not soft enough, it's not going to work. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this ball of clay right in the center of my stamp. I'm going to take my thumb and I'm going to press down. Okay, and I'm going to rock my thumb back and forth. And I'm going to turn it and I'm going to rock this way back and forth. And then I'm going to carefully remove that clay from my disc. And I'm left with this impression. Okay, if you're doing this with a disc that has not been fired, that's just been dried, then you have to wait about 15 to 20 minutes before you can try this again, because this will absorb moisture. And if you get this too wet and you try it again, the clay will stick. And then the whole thing has to be rehydrated and you have to start all back over. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a technique in clay for attaching. It's called slipping and scoring, and I'm going to attach this right here. All right, I need water, which I did not get, so let me grab some water really quick. A small dish of water, and I can even use my paper clip tool for this. All right, you cannot just expect that if I put this impression on top of my handle that it's going to stay. It does not stay. So we have to do what's called slipping and scoring. I'm just going to put a drip of water up there, a couple of them, and I'm going to take this tool and I'm going to make some kind of shallow marks on here, but I'm going to cross hatch. I'm going to do some cross hatching. Another drop of water on there, a little bit more cross hatching, and you build up a gooey clay. All right, I'm going to do the same on the back of this, but be very careful not to destroy my impression. Drop of water, some light cross hatching. Good, I've got a gooey clay built up. Okay, so that's going to be good. I'm going to press that on top of here, on the edges only. Do not press on top of your design. Now this is where the tools come in very handy. Pencil, tools that you might have made. I'm going to grab this one right here. I really like some of these tools that I've made, but I'm going to show you what's going to happen. If I turn this frog sideways, you can barely see a rise in there. That's not going to work. All right, so I'm going to have to press down the background quite a bit to get this stamp to actually work. And you can see already the difference in the depth of that. And I can even get a little bit more detail when I do this. It's a bit of work, yes it is, but you want them to be able to work. So I'll take my time. I might use different tools, just depending, just to get that background flat. And to get my stamp, I'm going to have to press down on the inside as well, because everything has to be pressed down, and only the frog should be raised up really tall. Only my design. Okay, so you can see how that's going to work. Let me show you one that's already done. Put this aside. Okay, so this guy, made with the same disc, same idea. I've already done all the work and I pressed it all down, and now I've got a nice raised frog. So this stamp is ready to be used. So I'm going to show you what that looks like when you use them. Take a piece of clay, I'm going to flatten it out. Okay, so if this was a finished piece of pottery, although it's not, I'm going to take my stamp and I'm going to slightly rock it. I'm not going to go like this because I can destroy my piece. So I'm going to place it on the edge and then I'm going to rock it down, give it a good firm press, and then remove it. And I'm left with this wonderful incised mark on my clay. You can, on the handle that you've got one design, you can put the same design on the back side, or you can do another design. And that's why I have you carving more than one design. So I've got this on the back side of my disc, and I can put that over here. And you can see that that's already happened on this handle. This is a double stamp. I've got my initial over here, and I've got my frog over here. Now, you might wonder why you couldn't use this as your stamp. And so I've got this example for you. This is the carving right here on a handle, ready to go. Now let me show you why this is almost impossible to do. If this is my piece of pottery, and it's pretty soft clay, and I take this stamp that's a carving, and I press it against this clay, same pressure that I just used with the other one, it barely leaves a rise. It's very difficult, and it's very uneven too. So it's really difficult to get a stamp that's carved out to work on the pottery. And the only way that you can do that, or the best way to do that, reshape this clay and I'll show you, because it's definitely possible. You can do that, and they look really nice. These stamps do look really nice, and a lot of professionals use them that way. But there's a trick to this. So if this were my piece that I wanted to stamp, I'm going to take another small, well, got to be soft clay. It cannot be hard at all. It's got to be nice and soft clay for this. So I'm going to take a soft piece of clay. The same amount of clay that I told you to use for your disc down here. That's too small. It doesn't cover much of it, so that's too small. I know I need a little bit more. Okay, so let's see, test it. That's almost too much. I'll take a little bit away. That should be it. I'm going to roll it into a circle. This is my piece of pottery that I want to stamp. I'm going to put a dot of water. I'm going to do just a tiny bit of slip and score. And I only need to do that slipping and scoring here, not on this, because this is going to be pressed pretty good. So I'll put that on, give it a little bit of a press with my thumb, but not much. Then I'm going to have to support the back side. I'm going to take my stamp and I'm going to center it. And I've got to press evenly and rock it back and forth a little bit. And then I can remove the stamp and I'm left with that. That's nice, and it's all raised. Okay, so that's the difference here. This one is the carved stamp, and it leaves a raised identification mark on your pottery. This one is the raised stamp, and it leaves an indentation in your pottery. Okay, now let's look at some that are already made, and just look at what works and what doesn't work, because I want you to be able to make these right the first time. It's really difficult when you make something and then it doesn't work, and then you get really frustrated. So let's look at a few things that just might not work. Okay, it's a good design idea, but let me show you what happens when you try to press clay in here. You can see how these lines have no depth to them or no width. So, and it's going to take a large piece of clay to cover that. Okay, so I'll put this clay on here, and I'm going to do the same technique. I'll put my thumb on here, rock it back and forth. Well, it already fell off. Okay, so that was enough. And you can see I've got a little bit of that design, but it's just not much. You would have to do a lot of work to push all this area down around that design. So your design has to be carved out really thick and really deep. All right, let's look at another one that sort of will work. It looks like the S is carved down enough, but the E just isn't quite. Roll up the clay, press it on here. Okay, so there is, you can see if I turn it sideways, there's not much depth to the edges of that E. So that has to be carved out a lot better right here. All right, one that will work perfect, because this one is carved out deep enough. I think I can get by with this clay one more time. press it on there, pull it away. That's beautiful. That will work. So then this gets slipped and scored onto a handle. I can clean it up a little bit, and then there is a stamp that's going to work. Okay, a few other stamp ideas. So this is a stamp that was made, and you can see it has no rise at all. And if I try to take that and press it into clay, you don't get much of a design there. It will disappear as this clay shrinks and gets fired. All right, so you can see the difference there. You need to have a good rise on that. And you start by a really deep carving. All right, so let's look at what some of these look like being used. All right, so here is a frog. This fired. While he was still soft, he got a stamp. And I always put the year so that you know when you made it. All right, stamps are very professional and they're very clean. Let me show you what it looks like when you don't use a stamp. Okay, so I was allowed to do this in high school. This was a long time ago. And I used a needle tool. Okay, and that makes a horrible, horrible mark. Never ever write or stamp your work with a needle tool. The lines are awful and they're messy and they're rough. All right, so, but this one wasn't done with a needle tool. This was done with a dull pencil. This is gonna work, but it has to be filed down because it's very rough. So again, you can see the difference between a clean and smooth stamp and then actually drawing on there with something. Here's another stamp that works well. It's beautiful. Meet Chuckles. Okay, Chuckles is a happy frog. Chuckles has a frog tattoo. All right, here is a mug, and I put this stamp on the side. I'm going to push the clay up, and I used one of my letter stamps on this one. Okay, now here's another one that did not get a stamp. It's used a dull pencil, but you can see how this was done very well with a dull pencil. It's not rough, it's smoothed out. So that's acceptable, but I want you to have a stamp. All right, I'm going to show you one more stamp, actually two more stamps. This one was done by a graduate from Thunder Mountain High School, and this is a stamp with his name on it. Turns out very nice. This water dish that I just used, I'm going to dump the water out before I turn it upside down. I purchased this at a thrift store, and I really like this piece, but I turned it upside down, and it's got a stamp on it. Let's see if I can come up closer to it. All right, it's a very, very small stamp. I could barely make out what it is, but it's been stamped, which is nice. All right, you've got a really good idea on how to make these and how to finish them up. When you get your stamp made, both sides are ready to use. You can make a single-sided stamp, that's fine, but you're just gonna have to make a couple of extra handles. All right, so when you get these done, just set them aside, not in plastic, and let them dry completely. It's called bone dry. And when they're bone dry, we will put them in the bisque kiln. All right, that is all.